Welcome! Today we're going to be talking about culture and worldview development in early childhood, and this is Benjamin Powell. First, what is a worldview? The figure to the right gives a good example of what a worldview is and what a worldview does. It informs beliefs and values and behavior, which is ultimately what people see. But beneath the behavior are the values and the beliefs which come from a worldview, which is often hidden even to the person who holds it. A worldview can be defined as the system of thought by which human beings make sense of themselves, others, and the surrounding world. It is a web of meaning, and most of the time it is unconscious. A worldview creates culture, or beliefs and values. Beliefs and values emanate from a worldview. They are the expressed ideas that symbolize and apply important aspects of one's worldview and influence perspectives about proper courses of action. As you can see to the figure to the right, out of a worldview flows belief and values, and then out of those things flow attitudes, behaviors, and skills. How do these things develop? How do we get a worldview which then creates culture? Well, all people, including children, are making sense of their lives in terms of the relationships they have, the experiences they undergo, and the knowledge that they have been taught. People, children included, are finding answers for the question, what is real? And children are doing this even before they can voice the question. The answers that children receive to this question, both conscious and unconscious, lay the foundation of their worldview, which allows them to participate in culture with other humans that are near and dear to them. And how does this relate to early childhood education? Well, early childhood classrooms are points of intersection. Every connection with a child involves the meeting of cultures and worldviews, those of the parent or guardian, those of the educator and caretaker, and those of the child. As you can see in the figure to the right here, there are many different visions of the world intersecting, and this is what an early childhood classroom, especially in today's diverse society, looks like. Which brings me to my second point. Early childhood classrooms are diverse. As our classrooms diversify here in the U.S., the cultures and worldviews represented by the families also grow in number. Educators need to be prepared to partner with the families from a variety of backgrounds, many of whom view their child's worldview development more holistically than is normal to many Anglo-Americans, who tend to view spirituality and worldview as private matters. We have more and more students in our classes that consider worldview, and specifically spirituality, important, and their families and parents view it as an important part of their lives. So we need to prepare to facilitate that sort of education. And finally, early childhood classrooms as connected and inseparable. And what I mean by this is that the role of the teacher, the purpose of education, the definition of success, the methods of child rearing, the appropriateness of discipline, the understanding of adult-child relationships, the view of human nature, and even the meaning of life itself are all influenced and determined by culture and worldview. Educators cannot partner with families with integrity and effectiveness until they understand this principle as well as their own culture and worldview, and then begin becoming familiar with the culture and worldview of the families that they serve. So, everything in education is in some way affected, informed, or even defined by culture and worldview. How does it work? Well, we can examine culture and worldview development through the lens of child development theories. For the rest of our time together, we're going to be looking at culture and worldview through the lens of other child development theories. These theories have been repurposed by scholars, researchers, and practitioners in order to help us understand what a culture and worldview is and how it develops in the life of a child. So, our first developmental theory is the cognitive structural development, which is informed largely by Piaget's work. And as I read these points, I will not go into depth, but you'll get a sense of what these are and then how they're applied to culture and worldview development. So, a man by the name of Fowler has taken a lot of the principles that Piaget laid down and developed them or repurposed them to help us understand CWD. And he calls this faith development theory. Faith, broadly defined, is a feature of all humans. Faith, in his definition, is more similar to my definition of worldview, in that an attempt to understand all that happens in our lives. Faith has a widely recognizable pattern of development, according to Fowler. Faith includes emotional, cognitive, and moral responses, and is observable in stages. Fowler gives us 5 of them here: primal faith, intuitive projective faith, mythic literal faith, synthetic conventional faith, and individuative and reflective faith. And as you can see, he has placed respective ages to each of these areas or stages of faith development. If you'd like to know more about these, please check Fowler's article, which is cited in the reference page. Some of the challenges that are posed to this understanding of culture and worldview development is that it describes faith and worldview too cognitively and too rigidly, which becomes unhelpful in explaining issues of diversity and adult conversion. The second area we're going to look at is socio-emotional development, and this is largely influenced by Bowlby's attachment theory, which let's get a quick understanding of. First of all, Bowlby said that mammals have innate signal behaviors to beckon caregivers. These signals are observable in situations where threat or danger is perceived, and as well as in other situations. Caregiver response determines a child's individual working model. So how a person responds to a needy child begins to develop the child's socio-emotional personhood, or IWM, which then affects future relationships and relationship skills. And Bowlby attached 4 key criterion to help us understand: proximity maintenance, safe haven, secure base, and strength and wisdom of the caregiver. This attachment theory has been repurposed to help us understand culture and worldview development. So, several researchers have understood the attachment theory to be a precursor for a child's relationship with God. And if secure attachment, or in other words, healthy attachment takes place in a child when he or she makes his or her needs known. This serves as a way to build a healthy relationship with God in the future, as well as helps accept the stance of the primary care provider, the religious stance. The need for human attachment also parallels divine attachment, but this sometimes has an inverse relationship in that as a child grows older, he becomes less attached to his parent and more attached to God or to the divine being that he believes in. And the attachment theory has also been used to help us understand compensation, or children that have been abused and neglected and turn to God to fill the gap, as it were, of the relational needs that were not met by the primary care provider. And once again, more on this, look to the reference page and the article on attachment theory. A challenge posed to this understanding is that both secure attachment and insecure attachment have the potential to lead a child to connect with God or with the divine nature, and this seems to be contradictory, at least on the surface. The final theory of development we'll look at is psychosocial development, which is influenced in large part by phenomenologists, Ricoeur, Risotto, and Noam, all of whom were a part of the postmodern movement. And some things to note about phenomenology: development of object relations, so understanding oneself in terms of what is around you. Life themata, which are recurring themes of interpersonal interactions, and decentration, or the giving up of the self. And this psychosocial theory has been, again, repurposed to help us understand worldview and religious development. And that was done primarily by a man by the name of Strebe. Strebe puts forward that we are multi-layered beings with multi-layered religious realities. He includes the relationship between themata and schemata. He notes that religious style perspective attempts to make sense of ritual, symbolic, and narrative features of faith in relation to life history and life world. So these are not disconnected things. And he puts forward 5 different styles that humans take to religion: subjective, instrumental, reciprocal, mutual, individuative, systematic, and dialogical. And these can coexist with one another. Some can be transitioning in, some can be transitioning out. They are not concrete stages like Piaget and Fowler's work. And once again, these are deeply rooted in life history. A challenge to this perspective is that it fails to provide rationale for faith developing into concrete practice, and it also sees fundamentalism and committed practice as elementary thinking. Once one advances to styles that reflect upon and criticize fundamentalism and committed practice, it is seen as reversion to begin to go back. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording here because we're going to need to go to a second recording to tackle the rest of this lecture.